What specifically is Jesus calling you to make different? Whether it's in you, in society, or both. In this 8-verse gospel, which follows immediately after last week's, Jesus quiets things. Most dramatically, he rebukes and quiets an unclean spirit. And the Greek phrase, I'm told, is the same as when he rebukes and quiets the storm 3 chapters later. But I was drawn to reflect with you that he also quiets the crowd. My name is Zac Willette. I use he, him pronouns, and I've been trying to faithfully follow this Jesus guy as a member of this community since 1999. The first crowd quieting is about teaching. This gospel is set in Capernaum, a busy city on a trade route and the Sea of Galilee. It has a tax office and a fair amount of power. So the religious establishment would have made sure that the teaching was done by scribes, an elite group of men who could cite from memory all the scriptural and interpretive footnotes you could ever want, and then more. They made binding legal declarations that they didn't always live up to themselves. That was teaching. So when Jesus walks in from Nazareth, a little no-name village, son of a carpenter, friend of fishermen, he is not their idea of a teacher. But he teaches with the authority of someone who walks their talk. It is as if he saw the religious education of his day, the teaching that fulfilled a function but inspired no one, and he said, it doesn't have to be this way. And then he did something about it. And the people were astonished. It could be translated, struck silent. Then comes the healing, technically an exorcism. What I read in preparing for this was that no one in first century Palestine would have been surprised in the least by a man with an unclean spirit showing up. The crowd would have seen this very person, or dozens of other people like him, every day. They had lots of room in their understanding of how things work for unclean spirits that took possession of people, or caused storms, or made fig trees or sheep infertile. Everybody's understanding was that spirits had more power than humans, but less power than God. So the surprise is that this son of a carpenter from the no-name village had more power than the spirit. But this isn't just a display of supernatural power. It is returning a child of God, the possessed man, to dignified standing in a community from which he would have been cast out before the spirit was cast out from him. It's as if Jesus saw this child of God possessed and said, it doesn't have to be this way. And then he did something about it. And the people were astonished. With astonishment, I have observed, there is a moment of stunned awe. And then there's a slow and only partially conscious decision. Do I change what I think to accommodate this awesome thing? Or do I find a way to dismiss it so that I can preserve my way of thinking, which is really to say, so I can preserve my way of being, which is often so I can preserve my comfort. The gospel says Jesus' reputation spread, but we know from how the story proceeds that the reputation Jesus got, it's a mix of distanced admiration and threatened fear, as well as earnest, if stumbling, discipleship. Not everyone in that stunned crowd became Jesus's follower, and not all those who did understood what he was trying to do. Throughout the Gospels, Jesus violates expectations, just like in today's verses. He refuses to condemn people who everyone thinks should be condemned. He seeks out and touches people that everyone thinks should not be touched. He challenges power that everyone knows should not be challenged, and it costs him his life for a time. But each time, Jesus saw the situation of exclusion, of isolation, of oppression, and said, it doesn't have to be this way. And then he did something about it. By the logic of our first reading from Deuteronomy, that makes Jesus a prophet. And by the logic of our second reading from Paul, we are each swept up in his work, body, mind, and soul. And while that faithful work can take many forms, it often starts with a sense that it doesn't have to be this way, and I need to do something about it. White supremacy says Black lives only matter if they keep things comfortable for white lives. It doesn't have to be this way. Economic injustice says the rich can profit during a pandemic that disproportionately kills people who aren't rich and people who aren't white. It doesn't have to be this way. Indigenous people and their lands can be trampled to make room for the fossil fuels that are choking the planet. It doesn't have to be this way. In relationships, those with the most power get their way, and those with unrecognized power get hurt. It doesn't have to be this way. Now, those are broad examples, and there are plenty more. But my guess is you don't need more examples. My faith is that there is something quite specific, if you're willing to heed it, already asking you to join with Jesus and say, it doesn't have to be this way. Let's do something about it. One last thing. For the record, Jesus didn't have ideal circumstances to work with either. There was corruption and sickness and rumors and plenty of cynics. But there were also searchers and helpers. And don't forget this part. There was also rest. Jesus took time to recharge during his work. It's highlighted just before that storm in Mark. He's sleeping in a storm on a boat with a pillow. It even mentions the pillow. I love it. I take delight in the fact that thousands of years of copying and pasting the Jesus stories haven't erased that evidence of rest from the text just yet. This modern day notion that the only time that really matters is productive time, that is a very clear product of capitalism. And it doesn't have to be that way. You and me, and Jesus, and all of us can do something about it. So thank you. I invite you to say yes to the small group invitation if you're able. The two questions I invite you to consider, I see they just went in the chat. One, what specifically do you and Jesus say doesn't have to be this way? And two, more urgently, what are you and Jesus going to do about it?